would say, then you're live and you're good to start.
3, 2, 1. Good morning, all of you who've managed to join the second day of the 6th MAS Red Group Working Group Conference. It's a pleasure to have you there. As some of you will know, this is the second day, and I hope those who were on with us yesterday were able to enjoy some very useful discussions and presentations. Now we're setting off on day 2, and we've got equally some really exciting and interesting topics, ranging from multidisciplinary MAS through, we're going to take a look at the scene in the Far East, specifically in Korea, with Dr. Kwangil Lee. Then we're going to have a look at defense and the use of technology within the defense sector. And then we'll have a look at guidelines versus reality from Stewart Radcliffe at Thales. After coffee, we'll be looking at the insurance piece, the risk, and then we'll dip into short sea shipping and inland waterways, which got quite a lot of airplay yesterday. And then finally, we'll be taking a look at what class societies, specifically Lloyd's Register, are doing. It's a packed program, and the way it works is that I will invite the speakers to give their presentations, and then we will have time for Q&A after each speaker. But then the speakers will remain available for the panel discussion, which will take place at 1:15 UK time and run for 3/4 of an hour. And that'll be chaired by Ben Murray, who's the Director of Maritime UK. So if you're looking at your screens, there's lots of information available. You can go into Teams and you will see the various sponsor companies. And should I say right at the beginning that I'm extremely grateful to BMT, Lloyd's Register, Thales and BAE Systems for their very generous sponsorship for this conference, and also the full support of Maritime UK and the UK Chamber of Shipping. You will see the speaker bios under speakers, and I won't highlight those, but you can dip in and out of them if you want to know more about the various speakers and what indeed they look like. And there's a lot of other information under networking and various, if you go into the Teams, if you go into the different sponsor pages, you will find various documents that have been uploaded and are being uploaded. And finally, just to say that when we finish, we will be producing versions of the conference that you will be able to go back to and reflect on with the presentations. And in particular, we will be uploading a copy of the minister's speech from yesterday, and also the speech of our second keynote speaker, who is Sarah Kenny. Now I'm going to move straight on and invite Sarah to start her speech. She is one of the prime movers in the maritime world here in the UK. She is very recently now the chairman of Maritime UK, and she is of course also the chief executive of the BMT Group. You can find the rest of her details, but Sarah is a huge supporter of what we're doing here in the autonomous world, and it's my very greatest pleasure to invite you, Sarah, to give us your pitch. Okay, over to you.
Great. Thank you, James. I'd like to start today by wishing you and all of your families well during what I'm sure all of you would recognise remain quite uncertain and difficult times. And I'm sure that, like me, you look forward to the day when we can all see an end to the pandemic. And I think, you know, whilst a return to what we might have thought of now as a pre-pandemic normal is pretty unlikely in this new digital age, I do look forward to at least being able to meet and resume a more social and interactive way of working. I'd like to start by thanking James and the working group for giving me the opportunity to speak today at this virtual conference for what is now my 4th time, albeit my first now as the chair of Maritime UK. And I have to say that I'm not entirely sure if I should be flattered that you want to hear from me again or worried that you can't find somebody else to speak. I'd like to also take this opportunity to say thanks to all of you who have continued to work under incredibly difficult circumstances throughout the maritime sector to ensure that our essential goods and services have continued to flow. I'm especially and acutely aware of the huge difficulties that have been faced by our seafarers, to whom many attending this virtual conference today owe a very great deal of gratitude. I fully envisage that many of the technologies that underpin maritime autonomy will help overcome some of these challenges if a global pandemic should arise again. I have to say, I think that's pretty likely. And I have to say that the experience of the last 9 months as how we as a collective of seafarers, academics, government, industry bodies, media and society have responded to the pandemic has certainly caused me to stop and rethink, not just about the number of technologies that are emerging, but also the pace at which technological change and disruption is accelerating, and additionally how much by better, faster collaboration. It's only a year since the last conference, and since then I think we have all experienced the colossal and disruptive impact of the COVID pandemic. But to my mind, in amongst all of that disruption, there has without a doubt been some real and positive change. The very rapid adoption of virtual working technologies over the past few months has profoundly altered the way that many of us work, and has now largely become embedded into what we could view as now an established way of working, as evidenced perhaps by the low number of workers who returned to city offices even after the first UK lockdown lifted. So not only does that demonstrate the potential for rapid introduction and adoption of technology, but also how quickly technology can be integrated into our lives and transform what was a wholly accepted, but perhaps now reflecting a somewhat obsolescent view of our workplace environments. In the past, I've spoken about the benefits of autonomous systems, their wider implications, and more recently, the challenges facing regulators and the need for a far more collaborative and entrepreneurial leadership and enterprise approach. So I find it somewhat of a worry then that we're here again now, this time discussing unlocking the future of mass. Surely by now we could and should have unlocked it. Here in the UK, we started this journey back in 2013, looking in detail at a programme to bring the industry together and establishing a working group to start to address what we knew then would be regulatory challenges. And I think we all thought then that that would probably be the biggest enabler. Through this working group, we have now delivered 4 iterations of a UK code of practice, and yet here we are still searching for the keys to unlocking it. So what then are the keys to unlocking mass? I've identified 6 for this keynote today, and I don't claim that they're exhausted. I just offer them as a start for a debate. I'll start with a relatively easy one, which is technology. We all know that the technology cupboard is already unlocked, and we have a plethora of technologies already available to apply to mass. Sensors are widely available, AI has been developed to a usable capability, connectivity and communications technologies are sufficiently mature and available, as are data collection and processing techniques. Much of the innovation behind those technologies has been driven by global demand in consumer markets for civilian applications. And many of these innovative products and services have created huge opportunities for a very diverse array of small to medium companies and large companies across many markets. However, much of their commercial success has been enabled not just by the innovative nature of the technology or the product, but by the dynamic nature of the way these products have been developed, and the agile and flexible approaches to acquisition, supply chain management, and importantly, product integration. I would suggest reflecting on it that as a sector overall, we've been rather slow to adopt them. Although I can reflect that over the last 12 months, compounded by the pandemic, the take-up of digital technologies in the sector has, without doubt, accelerated. And perhaps the key to going beyond adoption and into the full integration of these technologies now lies in a more coordinated approach, including the joint development of standards for this new digital world, which supports fully the operation of MASS. A second area that has to be unlocked is policy and governance, addressing not just the technical aspects, but also the societal, economic and environmental challenges. It's no longer compelling that technology is the solution, and we need to consider the development of policies at national and international and possibly even global levels. Furthermore, policies may well need to extend far beyond just the maritime sector, the obvious connection for us being the application of a common approach across the entire transport sector. I suggest that now is the time to break down governance and regulatory silos and work together to transform policies across the transport sector to enable the widespread adoption and integration of autonomous systems across land, sea and air. The third key today for me is trust, which when achieved goes hand in hand with adoption and integration. This goes well beyond demonstrating compliance with regulation. We need to recognise that just because we pronounce things, it will translate into being trusted. And we only have to look at the Boeing 737 MAX issues in the aerospace sector to show this for real. There are perhaps more subtle societal aspects to this as well, for which I will use as an example the anti-vax rhetoric around COVID vaccines, much reported in the media over the last couple of weeks. Key to the success of the anti-vax narrative is nothing to do with the rigour of testing or the degree of compliance with regulations. It is about public perception. Do we, the people who will be injected, trust the vaccine? We routinely roll out scientists, experts and politicians, but frankly, that may not convince the public. And as one of our leading UK politicians, Michael Gove, once said, I think the people in this country have had enough of experts with organisations from acronyms saying that they know what is best and getting it consistently wrong. Not only that, but the proliferation of social media gives unqualified people a credible voice. So to earn public trust in our systems, we must prove that we are trustworthy as engineers and as people, and that what we propose has societal and environmental benefit as well as being compliant. The next key centres around the adoption of new business models and practices. If anyone who's heard me speak before will know this is a pet subject of mine. MASS offers us a wealth of opportunity to both improve our existing business models and practices and to innovate to create new ones. For business, this offers the potential for fantastic growth, greater profitability and a heightened position in the global transport industry. But are we making this happen? I mentioned earlier that here in the UK, we began this journey back in 2013, around the same time that the iPhone 5 was launched. I'm sure you're all familiar now with the impact that smartphones have had over the last decade. Just one example is the way that they've enabled and accelerated online shopping, which has decimated our town centres and high streets as we knew them. Many of our best known traditional retailers have disappeared, and now we find new innovative agile digital companies have risen and many have grown to a colossal size. So I believe that now is the time to think about transforming ourselves and our sector, because if we don't, someone will do it to us. Instead of fearing this disruption, let's be disruptive. The next key area is skills. MASS will require us to develop digital skills throughout the enterprise. We need them to design, build, operate and maintain the future of smart ships and MASS. We need them in our business services and our ports and harbours that support the sector, and we will need them in our regulatory and legal bodies. At the same time, we need to begin the transition of skills to support future green technologies to achieve net zero. Taken together, this will require us to deliver the greatest skills change in the sector since the transition from sail to steam, but at a much faster pace. At the same time that we must do that, we also need to bear in mind that in this fourth industrial revolution, virtually every other sector is doing the same thing. And therefore, the demand for talent is going to be intense. We really need to work on our employee value proposition and the image of our sector if we truly want to unlock our ability to attract the best talent in this competitive market. The final key I want to raise today is investment. It's no secret that attracting innovation investment into the sector is challenging. It's a sector that is highly price competitive, operates on low margins, has high capital expenditure demands, requires extensive training and development of its people, and often the provision of shore facilities. At the same time, national and international regulations, such as the environmental standards and Brexit-related changes, are being implemented, which also require us to invest. So how do we build a compelling business case that makes investment attractive to investors, governments and industry in general against this backdrop of business model and regulatory change, not to mention the additional overlay of COVID and geopolitical uncertainty, and there's plenty of that around at the moment. So that's all 6 keys. And just to recap, the keys to unlocking the potential of MASS as I see them are technology and standards, governance and policy development, developing and engendering the trust and acceptance of others, the transformation truly of our sector's business processes, and nurturing skills and talent, making this an attractive industry to work in, and building a compelling investment case to attract both private and government investment. Having identified these keys, how do we as an enterprise deliver, acknowledging the uncertainty and turbulence that we've just come through and that remains and lies ahead? I believe to accelerate our thinking and realise the technological opportunities ahead of us, we must build a culture, a true culture of collaboration within our sector, one that doesn't necessarily have a long tradition of such. We've made a lot of progress on this, but there is so much more to do. And those who can disrupt us won't wait while we work out how to work together to transform ourselves. So we need to recognise that we simply cannot stand still or ignore this. We mustn't hold back the tide of progress, and rather than fearing this technology-driven disruption as it impacts our sector, we must face the reality that there is a huge opportunity in transforming and adapting as part of a truly global industry. This requires real, collaborative and possibly courageous leadership, and perhaps that is the biggest key of all if we are to unlock this future. That's it from me. Thank you for listening, and I hope my thoughts act as a catalyst for a productive discussion today. Take very good care and stay well. And James, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. And thank you for coming up with those 6 key points: technology, governance, transformation, skills and investment. Could I just ask you to expand a little bit more on your own views about whether or not we're getting the balance of investment right, particularly for the maritime sector against other sectors of transport?
It's a great question, James, and I guess the quick and easy answer to would be to say no. Of course, we're not getting the balance of investment right, but of course, it's if you look at the transport sector overall in the UK, taking a UK view, and I can't apologise for that. I just know that better than anywhere else. We have real challenges the whole way across our transport infrastructure, and it's hardly a surprise when you bear in mind that I think our on a like-for-like basis, if you compare sort of square mileage of the UK compared to virtually any other country in the world, we have more road and rail networks than anybody else. Not only that, if you look at the aviation industry, and I'm sure many of you will have seen the news over the government support packages that have come about over the last sort of week to 10 days, you know, our aviation industry has literally had to face a catastrophic event that many of us would have had in our risk registers as for ultra high impact but ultra low probability, and kind of would have to a large extent ignored it. So I think to say that the transport sector as a whole has faced an existential threat and had to deal with it over the last year is absolutely true. The marine and maritime sector is no exception to that, and I wouldn't say that we've necessarily felt it consistently across the sector overall. I mean, if you look at the leisure, marine and cruise sector, for example, they've had tremendous impact, quite understandably, with the demise of the people being able to take holidays and spend time together in leisure pursuits outside. So, you know, if you just look at that side of the sector, you can see the impact, which has been considerable. So have we attracted our fair share of investment? I suspect, and many of you will recognise this, that in some ways the fact that the sector has quite a strong culture of just getting on with it, sort of make, do and mend, and getting on with it, can sometimes mean that we don't attract quite the attention in terms of particularly government investment that we otherwise might. Because we get on and cope and we cut our cloth, and I think that's a real credit to the sector, but it can sometimes mean we're not seen. The fact that much of what we do is offshore also, you've heard the term sea blindness before, means that we're not that visible. But I think in some respects, particularly during the early part of the pandemic last year, the sector came into a new prominence because people started to acutely understand the relationship between their consumer products, the availability of food in supermarkets, toilet roll in supermarkets, suddenly accelerated the sector into public. So that has undoubtedly catalysed some investment, particularly in novel systems like maritime autonomy, but also in clean maritime solutions. And it's great to see that level of investment, both from government and industry, flowing in now.
I've published a question from Phil Buckley, and he points out that there's a timeline issue here. And ship owners, of course, are making investment decisions involving ships with a lifespan of 20 years plus. Of course, in some sectors, you can, if you look at the average age of ships that we've got in service, you know, frighteningly, this is very often up to about 40 years. Yeah. And so I understand that there is a slight problem as we settle in the crossover period. You know, which technology do you actually pick? But do you have a comment on this sort of timeline issue about the coming of the new and the innovative against the very established shipping that we know and love so much?
Yes, I do. I mean, it's a great observation, and I completely agree. You know, if you work in the automotive or aviation sector, you expect your platforms to last significantly less. The lifespan is significantly less, so you can iterate new builds with technology quite quickly and bring them into service quite quickly and take them back out again. Clearly, if you're in the shipping sector, you expect, quite rightly, a lot of bang for your buck, and ships are expected to last a long time and often have their lives extended. So I suppose, you know, the key there probably lies in modularity and avoiding the natural desire to overly integrate a system into what is already a complex system. You know, if you can achieve, and there's no reason why not, by the way, plug and play for some of the technologies that we're describing. I'm talking about the autonomy space now versus clean fuels, for example, which have much more significant impacts on ship design and need to be built in far earlier. But certainly for electronic systems, for navigation, for elements of autonomy, the real key there lies in modularity, being able to plug and play, lift and shift, reverse engineer into existing and legacy platforms, to keep them running even longer, which of course has a great return on investment for ship owners and operators. But when we're designing new platforms, bearing in mind that the technology that we're putting in that might feel like the most amazing thing we've ever achieved technologically will probably be obsolescent within 5 years, because that's the rate of change. In fact, probably more quickly than that. So if you're building these things deeply into your bridge systems, you've missed a trick. We need to be able to modularize these systems and plug and play them. And
I think we should never forget that there are equal benefits from some of the technology that we have coming out through the autonomous route, which is, even if in some ways more applicable to conventional shipping. There's a lot of work going on there. Matt Bolton has asked an interesting one. He picks up on your 6 key themes, and he's really teasing as to whether we can do this in parallel or series, and how would you prioritize them? What should we address first? What would you say to that?
Culture, leadership, collaborative leadership is actually what I would address first, because to be perfectly honest, I think the rest, much of the rest can run in parallel rather than in series. But I think when we ran the conference last year, we were talking about regulation as an enabler, having, I think, previously thought regulation was a blocker and how could we unlock it. I think what we've probably all proven to ourselves is that we can shape regulation together, but what's needed is the decision to make that collaborative up front. And I think in terms of businesses being prepared to co-invest, and also for government and industry to co-invest with trust and belief that the return on investment for everyone will be a sound one, you need to change the culture at the top of the shop. And here I am saying that as a chief executive of one of the companies who's engaged in that. So I'm saying we all need to change the culture at the top of the shop, because I actually think that's probably the biggest blocker of all.
That's interesting. And yesterday we had some very useful discussions. Francis Zachary from IALA, was talking about the need for solid business cases, and I think the two are slightly aligned. But what we haven't yet talked about really is the the push from customers to say, we know that we've got to make targets for our own companies, particularly in sustainability and emissions and so on. So we're not going to put up with old-fashioned ships that are still pumping out CO2, etc., etc. Rolly Rogers, who's been in the autonomy game for as many years as most of us can remember, says that you mentioned that the sector stands the risk of being disrupted. The question he asks is, who or what do you assess as the potential disruptors? Wonder if you can have a go at that one.
Yeah, so I'll just give you, if you'd gone and spoken to a London taxi driver 10 years ago about their future and what they'd like to, what they saw as the future of London taxi driving, they wouldn't have said, well, this internet only company with a load of unqualified people would rock up and take us out of the market, or there'd be driverless cars. So, one of the, I suppose one of the perennial issues of a sector talking to itself is that you don't know who's out there with something very disruptive that could completely change the nature of your sector and industry. But, if I'm to sort of think of clues around autonomy and autonomous systems and rapid digitization, you've only got to look at the big tech companies who we all know and love, the big brands. I mean, Google, Amazon, they're making such significant investments into this area. The whole idea of delivering parcels by drones, whilst we can all think of a million reasons why that might be undesirable or unsafe, is happening. It's happening. So, I think we can it's almost worth sort of thinking in your imagination, what's the worst that could happen? What's the wackiest thing that could happen to our sector? I can almost guarantee one of those companies is already thinking about it.
So can I. Can I come back to this question of trust for a moment? Different to culture, but the problem is that over the last 20, 30 years, we've all been offered wonderful bits of technology and they've landed on our desks, probably without any form of instructions, or instructions can be found online and so on and so on. And we've used them as best we can, and then somebody's come up with, the next version. There's been a bit of discussion about iPhones already, and iPads, and so on and so on and so on. Do you think we might be now settling into a period where the technology is in such a state that we can begin to build our confidence in it? Because without that, it's going to be incredibly difficult for people to understand that ships can move around without crews on board, relying on links and autonomy and computers and comms and so on and so on. So alongside the confidence and the culture side lies this trust thing. You picked up on it, and we've got to accept our systems. What do you actually mean? I mean, how do we accept our systems, that they are working and they're good enough, or do we need to be more demanding or perhaps even less demanding? What do you think?
You know, that there's an interesting pivot or seesaw here around the role of regulation as an assurance function, and the belief that we have in it as a sector is sort of three-pronged seesaw. Wrong analogy, but anyway, go with me. And so there's the role of assurance and regulation. There's the perception of the public, and there's our belief. Actually, and I've deliberately used the word belief because I believe as a sector that we sometimes lack belief in things that we've created. We're naturally skeptical, and possibly that comes from a long heritage of being a relatively low margin industry that operates over many years. You know, our business cycle, particularly if you think of the shipping part of the sector, our business cycle is very long, and very long business cycles don't necessarily create an environment to inject rapid innovation. Well, in fact, when I say don't necessarily, they don't. What's the point? You know, your payback's going to come a long time down the path, and frankly, you can easily get into a mindset of thinking, you know, been like this for the last 25 years. It's not going to change anytime soon. So I think we need to be careful about demonstrating belief in our own ideas and being prepared, much more prepared. And I think this comes down to leadership and culture, really, because it's not a technology thing. The technology's there. It's about leaders saying, yeah, I'm prepared to take a risk on that. Actually, it's not that big a risk in my view, but I'm prepared to take a risk on that, or a consortium is prepared to take a risk on that, and government are prepared to come with us and take a risk on that. It's a belief thing. It's a leadership and courage thing. So it's back to what I think the real key is to unlocking it. I can't hear you, James. I think you're on mute.
Apologies. You've raised the risk word, and it'll be very interesting to hear Britt Pickering talk in an hour or so about the linkage between risk and insurance, and that's really the point. Phil Buckley asked a question, you know, what will provide the breakthrough moment, you know, noting that progress could have been better. He cites innovation or regulation. I'd like to throw a third leg in there, and it's an open one. Is it innovation, regulation, or something else? I've mentioned customers already, and he picks up on the iPhone analogy. You know, none of us needed it till Steve Jobs built us one and then developed it, and then made sure the batteries didn't work after 2 years, and so on. Do you have a view on that?
I think if actually if we carry on with that analogy, because I think there is, without a shadow of a doubt, it comes back to the belief point I was just raising, something about making it real for people. So whilst the idea of mass remains in some kind of ethereal space where people kind of go, well, the technology is available, yes, but we can't get the regulation to it. Well, we've sorted the regulation. So there's something in my mind about just make it real. And I think you had Dan Hook, here yesterday at the conference presenting. There's an example of steps towards making it real. Someone needs to put something in the water that runs this way and take a risk on it, and all of a sudden it will change everything. Just like when the first iPhone came out, or in fact when the first mobile phone came out. And I remember people saying, why on earth would you want to carry a phone around with you? Why on earth would you want to be contactable like that? And then it was, why would you want your email on a phone? And yet here it is, completely integrated into our lives, something we didn't know we wanted. And in fact, some of us had convinced ourselves was pointless. None of us can live without them now. So there's a real thing of, it's the classic build it and they will come. We need to get credible demonstrations of what this technology can achieve and the difference it will make. And to my point about not waiting for someone else to disrupt us, it is quite likely that people with much larger investment budgets will just come along and go, all right, fine, I'll chuck a couple of billion at this and just make it happen.
Interesting. Just walking back a little bit, Anthony van Coyle has popped up from Belgium and said he's talking about the business cycle. Isn't the real challenge to change the business cycle? What's your view?
Yes, I agree. But I mean, so there's a but and an and in there. So there's something around the value that's placed in the sector overall, how it's financed, where the profit goes, how consumer markets place value on the transport of goods and services. So it is quite a big question, actually, to change the business model. But nevertheless, I think there's something around the business life cycle and how that works for the sector as a whole that should be examined. And it kind of comes into the whole collaborative culture piece. You know, are people accepting that different parts of the business life cycle attract different profit margins and have different longevities, and to what extent are they collaborating to get best in class service and an appropriate distribution of profit across the value chain, and I think that can only come from collaboration and strong leadership, because it's too easy for people to sit in their stovepipes and just go, well, my bit doesn't play.
Okay, and just as a final question, and it needs to be a fairly short one, Matt Bolton has picked up on the use of your term sea blindness. Many of us know all about that, and you know, the suggestion it's a serious impediment to investment, and what responsibility, this is the key, and you're one of the leaders in this, do we have as a sector to address this sea blindness?
Put simply, it's to be more engaging, particularly with the public. And we have in the past had a track record of talking to ourselves and being a rather insular sector. And I'm very pleased that over the last couple of years that has changed and is changing. So in particular, the fact that we come together as a sector and we're much more prepared to talk with one voice is big progress. The fact that we've coalesced that around a voice that we can also use with government, that government understands, is massive progress. We can and should do far more as a sector in terms of coordinated activity, for example, around STEM outreach projects. You get to children, you build that knowledge early and excite them about the sector. Hopefully some of them will join you, but equally they go home and talk to their parents. You know, we need to talk in the media far more than we do about what we do, not wait until something's happened or there's a problem. And you know, wouldn't it be nice if actually we were out there as a sector far more than we are, talking about the exciting things we're doing, rather than you know, being out there moaning about Brexit, which is what other parts of the transport sector, I think, have been a bit guilty of doing. That doesn't heighten awareness about the excitement of what's in store in the sector and what we do.
Sarah, I think that is a great place to close this particular keynote speech. I mean, not least because, of course, the maritime world's got so much to offer the other sectors and needs to jump in there and prove what the value that it offers. As always, and yes, I know you've done 4, but I would certainly always have you as a keynote speaker, because what you bring is huge experience and breadth of knowledge and some fascinating points. So from all of us to you, thank you very much, and to good luck in your new role as chair of Maritime UK. So a virtual round of applause for Sarah, and we're now going to switch and look at one of the companies that actually is doing this. And so if we can just move over, I'll introduce Neil Tinmouth. Neil is the Chief Operating Officer for a company called Seekit International, and they won the Global X Prize a couple of years ago, and he's out there at sea with vessels on this side of the world, and indeed now heading to the other side of the world, and he's going to give you a look into the multidisciplinary opportunities that the surface side of maritime autonomous systems offers. So Neil, I hope you're live, and off you go. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, James. Sorry, is the presentation on that side up? Perfect. Great. Thanks, James, for the introduction. As James mentioned, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Seekit. I've been working with Seekit since really its inception, prior to the X Prize competition back in 2016, and then I joined the company full-time in 2019. So I'm just wanting to explain a little bit of how we see the industry changing and how it has changed a little bit from more of a singular-minded approach to collecting information and data at sea, and how we're trying to go towards multidisciplinary, and how that actually, even if it's not on a commercial way, can actually help improve the entire sector, the ocean sector. So go to the next slide, please. Great. So I'm probably speaking to everybody. You've all heard these speeches before, but just looking at the ocean and what it actually brings. I mean, it covers 71% of the Earth's surface and takes 99% of the biosphere. It really drives what the systems that make our Earth habitable. But it also is a mainstay of our global economy, as everybody here knows. I mean, if you look at the figures in 2010, the ocean conservatively contributed around $1.5 trillion of gross value add and over 31 million jobs. The value of key assets from the ocean are at least 24 trillion, where if you compare that to where it fits in the largest economies, it would fit about 7th in the world. And this is all growing. I mean, by 2030, the contribution expected to increase to over $3 trillion with over 40 million jobs. But 2/3 of this is dependent on the fact that if we have to manage our oceans correctly, and we need to keep the oceans healthy. Now, as we all know, with global warming, acidification of the oceans, this is not really the case. The ocean health is deteriorating. So if we want to keep this economy and keep what we're all working in sustainable, we need to think about how we do this. So sorry, next slide. So despite being critical to our existence, we actually know relatively little about our oceans and what lies beneath the waves. Just taking into consideration the sea floor, which is it's a two-dimensional part of that biosphere. We only by 2020 only knew 20% of what's on the sea floor, and that's absolutely really bad. This is changing with the within the UN Sustainable Development Goals, in particular Goal 14, life below the water. If I just kind of summarize some of the 3 ones that are most relevant to us. So 14.2 is sustainably manage and protect the marine and coastal ecosystems to avoid significant adverse impacts. 14.5 is conserve at least 10% of the coastal and maritime areas consistent with national and international laws. And 14A is increase scientific knowledge, develop research capacity, and the transfer of marine technology. Now, these things are very critical, and what's really relevant today is that USVs and the technology, uncrewed technology that we're talking about today, is really going to have a massive impact on that. In addition to the sustainability goals, we have other large projects like the JEPCO Nippon Foundation SEBA 2030 project. We have the UN Decade of the Oceans, which is going to be encouraging a lot of research into the sector. And also we have things like Horizon 2020, where there's a lot of projects going to be going through there. So we are stepping towards this entire idea of better managing our oceans. But however, if we want to manage our oceans, we have to have data. So sorry, if you can just go back one slide. So traditionally, when we collect data, we've been doing it off of large vessels. I mean, this picture, I think a picture says 1,000 words, and this one kind of sums it up. I mean, we look at this, and these two vessels at this point in time were doing a similar operation, which was a pipeline inspection for different oil and gas companies. Now, I think anybody who's here will notice that the larger vessel has more capabilities in its general capacity, but it requires a significant larger crew complement. You've got the hotel staff, you've got the engineering staff, you've got the vessel operators, and then you've got all the scientists on board. These vessels are very expensive, so when you're looking at the prices of close to 100 million to build a vessel like this, if not more, it becomes cost prohibitive to be able to have a large fleet of these to collecting multiple sets of data. And when they get tied up into a single operation, because that's what's required at that time, it really does impact the value of the operations. And then you've got carbon footprint, and I think this has always been a big driver from CKIT's perspective of why we do uncrewed solutions. Is by building these smaller vessels, we're able to make them a lot more carbon efficient. I mean, the fuel efficiency of our vessels are running about 100 litres a day, which is significantly reduced from a larger vessel, which can burn tens of cubic meters per day when it's doing its operations. So these things are all very, very important in driving the demand for USVs. So if we step on through to the next page. So one of the things that's been key in the recent time, and I can't speak highly enough about working with Maritime UK and the Marine Coast Guard Agency, is how much support. I think we all know at this point in time, innovation often accelerates and goes beyond the legal regulatory side of things, and we actually normally have to try and fit in with it. And I think I would like to at first thank everybody we've been involved with over the last couple of years for accelerating the development of these things and making exceptions and granting the documentation required for us to do operations. So for an example, we just recently did a 22-day survey, and we worked closely with the Marine, the MCA, and then we also worked with the Plymouth area just to be able to get the permits to leave and do this entire offshore survey completely uncrewed. So we've had a lot of support, and I think that shows that the industry is accepting that this is the way that everything's going, and then doing everything in their power to try and make sure that we can actually demonstrate these technologies in a good environment. So we've gone to the next slide. Sorry, next slide, please. So where does CKIT fit into this and the entire idea of this multidisciplinary operations? And I think, as Jay mentioned at the beginning, that we were part of the X Prize competition and we won it. And I think when we look back on it, it was a key moment for us. And I'd like to think it's also a key moment for the industry, where we actually looked at how to do these operations. So previously, a lot of uncrewed vessels were doing individual operations, and essentially for the X Prize competition, which was all the way back there in 2018 and 2017 and 2018, it was all about how do we maximize the collection of data. In this case, it was bathymetry, so there was a single outcome. We were targeted with the entire idea of collecting a large area in a very short period of time, and the only way to do that is to use multiple technologies. So I think that's a really key part. And just because we're talking about the regulatory side of things, I would like to mention a little bit about the first uncrewed commercial transit to Belgium that we did in 2019, because that for us was a real demonstration about working with local authorities, both in the UK and in Belgium, to be able to do this crossing and be able to comply with call regs. So essentially what it was a crossing from Tolsbury in Essex to Ostend in Belgium, delivering oysters. And there was a lot of interactions. So you're crossing the world's busiest ship lane. So there was a lot of interactions with vessels, and it was really great to be able to go out there and demonstrate that these vessels with the current technology are able to comply with the call regs and interact in really busy waterways in a way that is actually the same as would normally be done. And we actually did write a bit of, well, some of the people from the team actually wrote a paper on that, and it was very interesting really to get the opportunity. So where we've grown, the company's grown very quickly, and I think that's an indication of the success of and where the industry's going. We've grown from a small little company this year. Even despite COVID, we've probably tripled it's quadrupled in size, and starting to deliver commercial vessels. The first one leaving in first week of January. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So to explain back to the X Prize how we did this and how this entire idea of using multiple pieces, multidisciplinary operations, we deployed for the X Prize competition, we need to do survey up to 500 square kilometers in 24 hours to 4,000 meters water depth. Now, when you look at that with existing technologies, that is a very, very difficult goal to try and achieve. But when you look at the combination of the USV and AUV, it really made a lot of sense to approach this in a different mindset. So what we see here is actually we separated an area. So we got a lot of data back that was readily available from like the JEBCO grid, and trying to interpret what the seafloor would be like so we could do a lot of planning. In this case, we identified that with the multi-beam system, some of the limitations. There's certain areas that we weren't going to be able to survey with multi-beam, so we have to then figure out what to do with the USV at the same time. And then other areas where it's best to operate the vessels in parallel, so be collecting two different data sets, and other areas where it's better to be operating and collecting one single set of data. So here we have the east-west line, so the large area, the large survey area there was done with with both of them running parallel lines to be able to collect as much data as possible. But in the little box, the little blue area to the left there, you will see it was 4,000 meters water depth. Multi-beam system that we had on the vessel at the time wasn't able to collect that. So instead of going off and trying to survey with the system, it was used. The USV was primarily used as a positioning system for that AUV. And then other areas, we realized that we could actually we could be running in parallel, and then we could just touch base to communicate and reposition the AUV. And again, in other areas, it was just the AUV may not have been suitable, so we would just conduct purely multi-beam survey from the vessel. So this is the idea of multiple pieces of equipment working together to give a better result that could be achieved by any single piece of equipment. If you go to the next slide, please. So where do we see this going? I mean, I think offshore wind farms offers a great example of where the technology is going and how this multidisciplinary operations will eventually look. We're taking, for example, something like guard vessels. There's a lot of call out at the moment for the use of guard vessels. But if you have a platform out there that's got all these sensors on board and it's just collecting a single piece of information or just doing a single job, it becomes very difficult to get the cost effectiveness right. Whereas when you look at the other operations that are required at the same time, there's abilities to be able to collect met ocean data. There may be things like wind lidars to collect wind profiles up, which is used for placing of turbines. We also have things like marine mammal observation. If you've got the high definition cameras on board that are you using for your command and control and your surveillance side of things, then there's opportunities to be able to run AI algorithms in the back to be able to help with marine mammal observations on the surface, but you can also have acoustic sensors to pick them up underwater. Now, another example within the offshore wind sector, which is quite an interesting one, is a lot of the times when you're doing operations on these wind farms, they're scheduled ahead, and sometimes these operations may be scheduled for a period that will have good wind. But because the operations have to be done there and then, because there's a certain window to do these operations, they shut down the turbines, and that's a loss of revenue for the wind farms themselves. But it also impacts the amount of electricity produced. If you had a vessel that has a long endurance and is being persistent and is doing other operations continually in the area, but can then go during a period of low wind, when the turbines are not really producing much power, it becomes a lot more efficient for the wind farms themselves to be able to actually do these inspections and services as needed. So this is something that I think the flexibility of a USV, where you don't need people offshore for a long period of time, becomes a real critical thing. If you go to the next slide, please. Just another example is when we're going out to do offshore surveys. I mean, at the moment, on the science and research sector, we're deploying a lot of Argo buoys. I don't know if anybody knows what the Argo buoys are, but for those who don't, essentially they're buoys that go down to about 2,000 meters. They underwater, and then they come back. I think it's on a 10-day cycle or so, and they ping back the data, collecting salinity and various sensor information as they go up and down in the water column. Now, to get those offshore at the moment, you need large vessels. But if we are doing these surveys with the USVs, which are now smaller, more cost effective, we can build more of them. We're able to deploy more of these systems cost effectively, but we're also able to do more operations. So it becomes a lot of interest about how can we actually again maximize the data collection. One of the side of things, I guess, that people will have in the back of the mind is, how does this work commercially? Because you're paid to do a job. You want to collect information that your client is paying for. But I think we need to look beyond that, as in there's a lot of requirement for scientific data that if we put on, let's say, an ADCP on a survey vessel and we're collecting ADCP data, that data should not go to waste. The vessel as a platform is already out there. The cost of having it out there is already being incurred, and the incremental cost for putting an ADCP that was sitting on the shelf of a company somewhere, not being used for multiple years at a time, it seems a bit wasteful that the big cost is not collecting data that can be used to feed back into the systems that can help us manage sustainably. So if we go back into sorry, if you can go to the next slide, please. So I think COVID has really spoken to how important this is now, especially with regards to business continuity. I mean, a lot of science organizations have almost lost an entire season of collecting data. But within the uncrewed sector, we've actually been able to do a lot of our operations because we're not sending people across the world, because people are not having to travel, and because of all the travel restrictions, we've been able to operate within a certain area relatively flexibly. I mean, again, back to that UTAS project, it was meant to be a transatlantic crossing. Although we weren't able to do a full crossing because we couldn't mobilize the vessel to Canada, we were still able to do a full 22 days of operations in the UK continental shelf, collecting data that's never been collected before. So this is really critical. So with that project itself, we actually shared that data with the UKHO and with CBIT 2030. And the idea is that both organizations benefit from it. We have the data. It is something that should be shared openly, more openly with the community. Now, on that project, we had also intended to collect ADCP data for current profiling, but unfortunately, there was a little bit of a challenge with the ADCP. But the intention was that we still envisioned the project as being CCIT is out there with our USB, being a platform for which people can attach their sensors on and actually collect multiple data sets. So we could have 2 or 3 different companies attaching an ADCP or a meta-ocean or an air-water interface. Potentially, if we're doing sound velocity profiles via winch, change the sound velocity profile for a CTD with multiple different sensors on it, and you can actually add even further value to what you're actually doing out there. So if we can go on to the next slide. So one of the challenges I think that everybody will raise when you're collecting data is that the more data you collect, it becomes really difficult. But with the decrease in the cost of data storage, I mean, it's come down significantly in the last couple of years. We're able to collect and store data, but one of the challenges is hey, what do we actually do with that data? How do we handle it? Because no matter if you collect the data, it's the actual processing and the interpretation that is actually quite expensive and time consuming. But what we did on the UTAS project is we incorporated some AI data processing, which brings down the cost of it. And I think it was a really good example for us to be able to run through. So we used Teledyne Caris Mira AI on the project, and we ran a comparison. Well, it was with Map the Gaps and Teledyne. We ran this comparison of the data set that was collected, and the data set itself, I think it was 400 gigs of data, 1.5 billion data points. To process manually took 250 hours. To process using AI to a usable map that could be contributed towards something like CBIT 2030 or the UKHO, that data only took 3 hours to process. I mean, when we did a combination of the AI and the human processing to get the highest accuracy possible, we managed to get that done in, I think it was in 61 hours, so 71% reduction. So it goes to show that going out there and collecting data with the cost decrease in storing it and the ability to process it using AI software, it's no longer a barrier to entry to collecting the data. It's no longer an excuse for businesses and companies to go out, not to go out and collect data to share open, in some cases, to share openly with these research institutes. So if you can go to the next slide. And how is this all going to be looking towards the future? So vessels are getting bigger. I think we've been focusing on mostly on the coastal 12 meter. We're now doing long endurance over the horizon type of work with USVs, but we're also starting to develop larger vessels. So we're going into the 24 meters, and I think there's a lot of companies going into this space. And this means that there's more endurance. So we're out there longer. So there's more data that we could be collecting, but it also means that we can put more sensors on there a lot more easily. So there's a lot more opportunities to come back to. And I think it just comes back to this entire point that if we're out there and we should be collecting as much data as possible so that we can feed this back in and that we can actually manage our oceans sustainably. And that this actually, although it may not seem like it has a direct commercial impact now, will for all of us help develop a better economy for us in the blue ocean economy. Thank you.
Neil, thank you very much indeed. I'm desperately answering a question that's popped up about what ADCP stands for. Could you just tell everybody what you mean by it? I mean, it's
ADCP is an acoustic current Doppler profiler. Essentially, it's used for taking current measurements. So these are things that you can put on a vessel. And I think one thing I'd just like to reiterate is I know a lot of people here in the commercial shipping side of things, so maybe not in the scientific research or the more offshore wind farm sector. But there is opportunities to put these sensors on vessels that are crossing oceans and collecting the data and contribute. And that data goes back into modeling that improves your weather forecasting that will help actually increase the efficiency of these vessels going forward. So it is a way that everybody can contribute if it's into the future.
It certainly is. And of course, the technologies that you're using will be available and should be used in other types of vessels. Could you just give us a few more details about how you see the sort of technologies and advances that CKIT's made in the last 2 or 3 years in the next 2 or 3? I mean, the rate of change is phenomenal. Can you comment on that for me, please?
Yeah, sure. The rate of change has absolutely been. It's almost as if you can't keep up. It's one of these things where the scaling is becoming a challenge because the technology is changing so fast and the capabilities are changing so fast. So when we entered this in 2017, I mean, there wasn't that many vessels that were deploying AUVs from USVs. I think actually we could have been one of the first to successfully demonstrate that in the X Prize and in a commercial job in Norway. And we go to where we are now, where we're looking to deploy ROVs. We're looking to do towed arrays for different equipment. So the technology and the capabilities of these vessels is increasing at such a rapid rate. And what's actually interesting is that once you've proven that you can do one aspect, deploy an AUV, that it opens the minds to our customers and clients, and they can start to see more capabilities that can be achieved. And they're pushing and driving us to better our technology and develop further ways of collecting more data.
Risk has been a topic of conversation this morning already, with Sarah mentioning it, and there is a question which is published from Britt Pickering, who we'll be hearing later, about risk and insurance. What's your own experience? I mean, you've taken risks, so can you give an example of where you weren't as satisfied as you wanted to be, and perhaps one where you were more than satisfied that the risk was worth taking?
I think so far we've been lucky that all the risk we've taken is paid off. Even if we're doing operations and they may not go 100%, we've been able to get out there, do what we wanted to demonstrate, and come back on our own steam without having to be rescued. So we're very lucky in that regard. Well, not lucky, but it's a very calculated decision. We're always testing and demonstrating. So that UTest project, we talk about 22 days of operations, but there was 5 weeks of trials and testing and improving the systems to make sure that it was secure. So there's a lot of effort that goes into it to mitigate that risk. However, as we see, uncrewed vessels will always have an amount of risk involved in them. But what we're doing is building as much redundancy as possible. So if you have the failure of one system, you have something else that'll pick it up. And I think that is critical for the adoption, is to have that redundancy and reliability to the industry to de-risk it as such for the clients.
Can I also pick up on another topic that Sarah raised, which is sea blindness? I mean, I know that CKIT has quite a reasonable high profile on social media and such like. Do you think you've got the right profile? Do you think there's more that can be done? And what's your view about companies being perhaps a little more reluctant than they should be to share information and, dare I use the D word, data? Do you think this is an area where you expect to see a change in the coming year or so?
I think we are seeing a rapid change in the interest. just the visibility of the marine sector. I think autonomy is picking up quite quickly in there. It's being adopted. Well, we're seeing a lot of demand from the clients in that, so it is getting the visibility that it needs. I'm hoping it will accelerate even further. When it comes to actually, yeah, so we are getting the visibility that we need, but it definitely needs to increase. It's really difficult to operate in a sector. I mean, as you find, funding is quite a challenge. If you look at a lot of the government fundings that are coming out, although there are a lot around the robotics and the AI sector, but you see how difficult it is to get awards from a maritime company. I mean, we've applied for some grants where it's actually around the transport and the robotics, but it's actually actively excluded the maritime sector and such. So that, I believe, does need to increase. But I'm hoping that with things like Horizon 2020, the UN Decade of the Oceans, that will become more visible and we'll see more interest in that sector.
That's very interesting. I mean, you're implying that you're not getting grants because you are in the maritime sector. And we talked about that briefly earlier. There's a question I published from Rolly Rogers. It's an observation, really, but he's pointing out that owners of MASS with data gathering capabilities should consider registering their MASS platform with the WMO Ships of Opportunity. He's put a link there. Have you dealt with them at all?
No, actually, I haven't personally. But I do know of a lot of projects. So I work closely with the JEPCO Nippon Foundation CEBA 2030 projects just because of my background and the history with the Nippon Foundation through XPRIZE. And I know they are looking for vessels of opportunity all the time to be able to attach multi-beam systems or even single beam echo sounders on.
Okay. I'm going to draw this to a conclusion, Neil. I've just published a final comment from Phil Buckley about how the rate of change is phenomenal. Doesn't need an answer, it's just a comment. Listen, CKIT is a trailblazing organization and doing extraordinary work. And please forgive me, Neil, but we keep hearing this COVID word. I think I should point out that Neil is actually doing this from South Africa, where he's completely stuck. You may detect a Southern African tinge to his voice, but he's actually just recovering from COVID. So on behalf of everybody who's watching, good luck, full recovery, and thank you for joining us today. An excellent presentation. Thank you very much indeed.
Perfect. Thanks very much, James.
Now, we're going to switch not topics, but geography, because I'm getting feedback. Amanda, if you're listening, can you possibly have the mic off your end? Kwangil Lee will be known to some of you, but he's an extraordinarily influential man in Korea and more widely in the Asian region. And some of you will have perhaps attended the ICMAS series of conferences and so on and so on. I was very keen that we got a view from the Far East, and so Kwangil has very kindly recorded a session for us today. And Amanda, if you're able to, could you roll the video of Kwangil's presentation, please?
My name is Kwangil Lee. I'm a professor from Korea Maritime and Ocean University. I'm also chair of Korea Autonomous and Unmanned Ship Forum. It is my great honor to present this talk in the 6th MASRWG conference. The title of my talk is Smart and Autonomous Ship Activities in Korea and Asian Region. So recently, autonomous ship is important issues. So I'm going to introduce some activities related with the smart and autonomous ship in Korea, especially. And also, I'm going to introduce some activities in Asian region. So So this is I will have a background and Korea's activities and Asian activities, and I will summarize my talk. The background is as the industry revolution impacts on the maritime industry. So shipping 4.0 is a current trend in the maritime industry. So based on the shipping 4.0, digitalization and automation intelligence becomes an important issue. So especially in Korea, as you might know, Korea has major, we have 3 major shipbuilding companies. So the budget and then growth is very important. Also, we have some shipping, and then we also have equipment and system. Compared to the other areas, shipbuilding is a big portion. However, in the shipping 4.0 era, how we could take lead in the maritime industry, that is a big that is an important issue. So the current government has some national strategies. So we have top 100 national project, and then leading innovation growth project and a strategic plan for Industry 4.0. In this national strategy, they are mentioning about the smart shipping, and autonomous ship issues. So current government is going to have autonomous technology will be the next generation's key technology. So we are going to focus on the autonomous and smart ship technology. So how autonomous shipping and autonomous ship activities is going to be happen in Korea. So we already developed a smart ship, which is called SAN, Ship Area Network. Based on this technology, we are going to have smart autonomous shipping. So this smart autonomous shipping is composed of smart navigation. It comes from the in-navigation. And then we also have Industry 4.0S, and we have smart autonomous ship project and digital port project. So smart navigation and Industry 4.0 S is going to be ending this year, and the smart autonomous ship and digital port 4.0 project is undergoing. So I'm going to introduce this project slightly. So smart ship is a project which developed the integrated ship platform, so which is called SAN. So SAN-based ship data and network management platform. So this is used for remote monitoring and maintenance platform. When we developed this SAN project, this one is based on the standardized network platform, so which is called Ethernet-based network platform, which is called IEC 61162-450, and then we also based on the security, shipborne network security, which is called IEC 61162-460. So based on this one, we developed many remote maintenance and remote monitoring system. So now we are changed into the smart autonomous shipping. So when we develop the smart autonomous shipping, this is not just one technology. We are going to develop many different technologies. So one is Industry 4.0S is more focused on the equipment and system. Smart navigation is more focused on ship-to-shore communication and ship-to-shore communication infrastructures. autonomous ship is intelligent system for the ship. We also are going to consider digital port. So this work is not just one project. So 4 different projects is going to be combined or collaborate together. So let's start with the smart navigation project. So smart navigation is a name of Korean for e-navigation. So e-navigation is defined by IMO is the harmonized marine information by electronic means and safety and security. So this e-navigation service is used for autonomous shipping because which is accelerate machine-to-machine communication and then digitalization of the maritime service. So based on this concept, Korea government is developed a smart navigation project. So develop e-navigation services for SOLAS and non-SOLAS vessels. And also this project is focused on the developing maritime communication infrastructure. So we have physical infrastructure with LTM, and also we are also participating the MCP development, maritime connectivity platform. Based on that, we developed many different services. So electric charge services for non-SOLAS vessel, and maritime safety information and berthing information, and then monitoring service for the risk vessel, those kind of, and then providing the safe route services. Those kind of services are provided by this using this communication infrastructure. As you might know, the smart navigation project is developing the maritime connectivity platform. So we have physical communication infrastructure. Based on this communication infrastructures, we have a logical infrastructure called maritime connectivity platform, and then developing the many different services. So e-navigation services or sea traffic management services or other single window services. Those kind of services are provided by the maritime MCP communication platform. So I think the connectivity platform is important, and then we also has an importance on the equipment and system. So in the Industry 4.0 S project is started 2016 to this year. So this main purpose of this project develop a common big data platform for smart shipyard and shipping. So Korean industry is more focused on the shipping industry so far. So how shipbuilding, the information collected from the shipyard, how those kind of data can be shared with other maritime service. So to accelerate those kind of data utilization, we have a common big data platform which can be shared with other maritime application service. So develop application service for shipyard and ship and application services. So based on that, using this big data platform, we are going to promote collaboration among marine industries, and then develop and establish ICT software industry ecosystem based on this big data platform. So we, the Korean government, is trying to transfer from the shipbuilding industry into the system software-based maritime industry. So this is the main purpose for that. So this project is promote and then supporting the software-based ICT companies. Another project is a digital port. Digital port is which is called Intelligent Port Logistics Technology. This one is for 5 years project, starting from last year until 2024. The main objectives of this project is support automation and digitalization for autonomous logistics. So there are two parts of this project. So one for hardware and software. So in the hardware part is automation. So we are going to develop automation of equipment and system import. Digitalization is a connectivity and intelligence for port resources. So smart, standard, eco-friendly is a main keyword for this project. So to support this project, we have developing IT infrastructure and facilitate equipment purpose. We have provide hyperconnected port and smart security and safety port, and then shipping port and for land logistics services. So the another category is autonomous logistics port. So for this purpose, we developed the digital process with a new facility. So this is the main component for the digital port project. So unmanned port and electric car. So this is for eco-friendly hyperconnectivity and accident prediction and prevention. And microgrid is more or less eco-friendly, and AR, VR control and information more. So we are going to develop more intelligent port services to accelerate the autonomous logistics effort. So this is the basic structure for digital port. I'm sorry, I just only have a Korean version. So we have three different layers. So physical layer and transaction layer and business layer. So physical layer is more like equipment side. Based on this one, we have abstract all the physical equipment and system into the transaction layer. Based on this transaction layer, we developed many different services. So this is a smart terminal management, port resource sharing, and then safety prediction, and then autonomous navigation at the port. With this kind of services, we are creating value-added services. So before we also started the autonomous ship project. So before we start autonomous mega project, we are going to have a feasibility. We have a feasibility project. So this autonomous feasibility project is started from the 2017 to last year. So this one is developed semantic-based information system and safe navigation control and ship human interaction. So this main purpose of this project is feasibility test, how we can test the autonomous ship, and then what kinds of system components might be necessary to realize the autonomous ship. So this is a basic concept project. Based on this one, we developed the basic components for the autonomous ship system. So we have different layers. So we have navigation and environment data can come to the analysis system. So analysis system is going to analyze many different information. So weather and ship dynamic and object and ENC data. This information goes to the mission planning system. So this one is consists of three components. One for global route planning for the long-term purpose, and then local route planning is for local optimization to avoid the collision, and then for situation awareness. Based on this one, actual decision made by the ship control. So actually, we did not develop the real autonomous ship, but we evaluate the performance based on the ship handling simulator. So ship handling simulator is a connected ship control system. We are utilize the INS-based simulator. So INS-based simulator is interact with the ship control and ship handling simulator. based on that, we evaluate the autonomous system. Another main contribution of this AI-based autonomous ship project is identifying all the data elements for the remote monitoring and control. So based on the root data model based on new ISO standards, we called S41, based on that, we identify some data elements might be necessary to the autonomous ship. So this data element is identified and then classified based on the S41. So this is a diagram relationship with data elements. So from this year, Korea government launched the mega autonomous ship project. So this one is for 6-year period. The budget of this project is $135 million. So vision of the this autonomous ship project is taking the lead on the future market share and international standard. So the main purpose is autonomous navigation system level 3, and then global level reliability and standardization, and autonomous ship market share by 50%. This is quite big goals. So for this project, this project is going to develop 3 major systems. So one is advanced sensor system, and autonomous navigation system, and autonomous engine system. So for autonomous navigation systems, we are going to develop the autonomous navigation, could be enabled. So ocean going could be for ocean going vessel, IMO level should be 3, and then in the coast areas, so we are targeting on the IMO level 2. So we are going to develop some component for the integrated platform for digital reach, and then navigation, situation awareness, and collision avoidance, and then intelligent decision-making system. This is the main target for this autonomous navigation system. And then autonomous engine system is we are going to this project is going to develop the electric-based autonomous engine system, including intelligence maintenance, so monitoring and diagnosis system and control. So for the testing, so the autonomous ship test bed and verification technique shall be included in this project. So this project is include a real test bed, and then it also includes the cybersecurity issues. Also, we think the international standards becomes an important issue. So in this project, we also develop the international standard in IMO and then IEC and ISO level. So we are interested in the regulatory works. Also, we are interested in the technical standardization work. So this needs to be harmonized. So we established a working group to working together. So these kinds of works are collaborated closely at this moment. Also, there are several projects are ongoing in Korea. One is DC-based hybrid smart ship. This one is developed by the Ulsan city. So this project is starting from last July to 2022. So this vessel is going to be used for the equipment and system testing. So this one is a DC-based hybrid smart ship. So the major function of this ship is a grid-based electric propulsion system, and then going to develop intelligent navigation system and remote monitoring and intelligence maintenance. So this one is quite large ship. It's almost 90 meters. So using the big vessel, we are going to test autonomous navigation and intelligence maintenance system based on the DC based. So this one will be used and will be available soon. Another activities related with the autonomous ship is Gyeongnam unmanned ship areas. So this one is starting last December until 2023. This area is a test area in Goje areas. So it's a small testing area for small unmanned ships. So in this test areas, colleague-based autonomous ship is tested, and then route planning, tracking, collision avoidance, this kind of functions can be tested in this area. This one is a special area, so small unmanned ship can be tested without any specific restrictions. So this one is special areas. Okay, now I'm going to introduce the other activities in Asian country. So next one is Japan. Japan is starting to develop a smart ship application platform since 2012. So this one is application is going to develop application service platform which needs data from onboard equipment. So as you can see, all the data, ship data from the engine and then other equipment and system, all those data can be collected to the data server. This data server is going to transfer to the ship shore-based data server, and then when all data is collected from the ship, this data can be shared with the many different service provider and the services. So this project is going to develop a ship data center. So ship data center can collect all the data from the different ship, and this service can be shared with the many different service provider. This work are standardized in ISO 19847 and 19848. This kinds of work is going. Recently, NIK defines the concept of action planning and execution system, which is called APEXes. So this one is action planning system. Action planning system. Those information can be delivered to the ship. So using the action planning system, the actual control of the ship is undergoing. So using this station, anti-collision and anti-ground function is supported, and then docking and undocking and then function can be supported. Using this action planning system, the ship formulate and present all the action plan. So this diagram shows how this action plan can be processed at the ship. So they are going to provide long-term planning and the short-term planning to avoid the object. So also Japan is going to provide a real demonstration project. Each one is going to be included in the project. So also Japan launched the DFFAS project. So this project is designing the future of full autonomous ships. So this project is going to develop the crewless maritime autonomous ship, and then can be used commercially by 2025. So they are going to test with crewless maritime autonomous ship at this moment. So participating 22 companies in Japan, and including JMS and MTI. I'm also going to the activities related to Singapore. Singapore recently established the CEAOP, which represents Center of Excellence for Autonomous and Remote Controlled Vessel at TCOMS. The goal of this new center is digital meta-ocean and vessel performance and structural health monitoring. This is going to develop remote monitoring and control for the autonomous ship. Also, Singapore is going to launch the Massport project, which is established in last August with 8 countries, including China, Finland, Norway, and Netherlands, and Korea. So this project is provide the guidance and condition for mass trial first, and then actual trials, port-to-port mass trials. So this project is going to test port-to-port mass operations. Actually, Singapore has IntelliTog project. This is aims to enhance productivity and navigation safety at the port. So using the port, they are going to autonomous ship operations. Remotely, they are controlling the using the tugboat. This is done with the Marzella. Also, I'm going to introduce China's activities. China's smart ship activities with the Green Dolphin. This is bulk carrier information. And then 2017 June, China launched the Unmanned Cargo Ship Development Alliance. So this one is a collaboration work with ABS, DMVGL, and Rolls-Royce. And then they are targeting to develop unmanned cargo ship by 2021. Also, China has a pilot project focused on the IMAS 3 and level 3 and 4. They are developed based on the risk management. Also, they are going to develop. They are developing autonomous cargo ship architecture, as shown in this figure. So also, China is taking a lead ISO TC8 Working Group 10, which is called Smart Shipping Working Group. So in the Smart Shipping Working Group, they are developing the key technology related with autonomous ship. So currently they are developing autonomous ship terminology in their working group, and then they are going to develop other standards related with autonomous ship and autonomous and smart ship. The other activities in Taiwan. Taiwan is also working on autonomous and unmanned ship activities. They are Tamushi and Love River. They are developing field verification of the route planning and sensor fusion and collision avoidance functionality. So they have situation awareness equipment, and then they are real demonstration with the passenger tour boat. This one is performed in the last February. So I have opportunity to see their demonstration. Okay. So other activities, CAOS and KMU in Korea. We are involved in the smart and autonomous ship project in Korea. Also, we are interested in autonomous test and validation project. We are working on other international standards. So we are collaborating many companies, and then we are working with other institutes at this moment. So conclusion: so Korea has involved in various research related with researches related to maritime digitalization and autonomous ship, including navigation. Japan, and then works on the standard system for reduced and crewless ships. Singapore is working on the efficiency and remote control of the autonomous ship. And then China is also involved in smart autonomous ship in ISO. Taiwan also is testing autonomous system in their inland waterways. So my conclusion is data and digital connectivity for smart autonomous ship we are interested, and test and validation of the autonomous ship is also important. And the international standardization is also important. And this work cannot be done by just one country. So we need a collaboration. Collaboration might be necessary. So we are providing collaboration networks for the industry, researchers, and academia. That's it. Thank you so much, and thank you for your time. Bye-bye.
Kwangil, I don't know if you're actually listening online, but can I thank you very much indeed for that amazing trip around the Far East and summary of all the various activities that are going on. Kwangil wasn't planning to be live online for questions, largely because of the time difference, I think. But I hope that what he's done is to provoke quite a lot of interesting thoughts about the fact that what's going on out in the Asian region is significant, and we would all do well to pay close attention to it. We're now hopefully going to switch to the defence world, but I'm having some difficulty. I know that Commander Antony Crabb and Mike Woods from BAE are out there in Cyberland somewhere. I'm just going to try my luck and see if either of them actually answer. If I, Anthony or Mike, are you online? Okay. We may have a slight technical glitch here. Stewart Radcliffe, are you available? Are you on? Are you signed in, please? If so, we'll see if I can get Stewart Radcliffe from Talis up, and we'll just switch the speaker format round while we sort out. I know that both Anthony and Mike are there. They've told me that, but I have a feeling they may not be on the right circuit. Stewart, can you hear me now? Stewart, are you live? Is your mic unmuted?
Mike is unmuted, James. I wonder if he's having audio problem.
Sorry, do we have Stewart Radcliffe online or not?
I see Stewart.
He's there, but Stewart, can you say something so we just confirm that you're live on your mic? Says he optimistically. Stewart, any sign of you? I don't really understand what's going on. What I'm tempted to do is to take a 15-minute break now while we sort the tech side out of this. So if you'd just like to pause the show for 15 minutes, get yourself a cup of coffee, and we'll do our best to get Anthony and Mike on as our next speakers. And I'll be back up online at 10:50 UK time, 10:50, 15 minutes time. Okay, thanks very much indeed.
James, can you hear me now?
Is that you, Stuart? Yes.
No, this is Mike Woods.
Oh, Mike, great. What about Antony Crabb? Is he there yet?
I've just told him what I've done to fix it. And he's trying
we're
again.
live, so we'll just break off there. I can watch what he's doing. If necessary, I'll ask you to lead on, Mike, in a minute when we reconvene in 10 minutes, okay?
Yes, okay.
James, good morning. It's Antony Crabb here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
That's fine. You're live to the world, so I'll call you in a sec.
Okay, super. Mike, good morning.
Oh, that's a relief.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, if you have managed to make yourselves a cup of coffee, it's a sort of 1-minute warning that we'll be kicking off with the next session, which is the Defence Mass Technology Update, led by Commander Antony Crabb and Mike Woods, the Chief Technologist for Autonomous Stuff at BAE Systems. So 1 minute and then we'll kick off. While I wait, I have published an answer to a question about whether or not the presentations will be recorded and such like. Yesterday's are already up. If you go onto the Teams site and look under Teams, you'll see that all the presentations from yesterday have already been uploaded, and today's will be uploaded at the end of the conference. They will then stay there for a week. Although you may not want to go back to the conference site to find them. In that case, we will be uploading them in the next couple of days to the Maritime UK site, where the conference was originally promulgated, and you'll be able to see everything that you need there. I have been asked whether the presenters have been recorded, and I'm working on getting an answer to that particular question. It's 10:49, so I suggest what we do now is to move on to the next presentation, and I'm delighted to welcome Mike Woods from BAE and Commander Antony Crabb, Royal Navy, from an outfit called Navy X, which no doubt he will explain. And so if I can, Mike, I think you're the first speaker, and if we could roll the presentation. There you go, off you go.
I think Antony's kicking us off, actually.
Yep, well, good morning, James. Thank you for the introduction, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. A real privilege for me to be able to address you, albeit virtually, here this morning. And it's interesting, through the course of yesterday's presentations today, I really must put my hand up and recognise that I am a newbie here. Lots of years of experience that you all hold in different applications, many of which will read across into the defence area, but myself only involved with the maritime autonomous systems for the last 6 months, so I have a lot to learn, but it's a real privilege to be able to speak to you today. And what we want to talk about is, whilst the title Defence Mass Technology Update, I mean, wow, that's big. We may be behind the curve, but that's big. But really, Mike and I would just like to bring down a bit more, focusing on who and what Navy X are doing. Some of you may have had interactions in the past, and we've changed how we're delivering the autonomy for the Royal Navy, and then focusing a bit more using our work together with BAE Systems to develop our APAC 24 as the case study, or as the vehicle for discussing some of the safety and regulatory issues. Safety and regulatory issues that plague everyone in this forum in one way or another, and we're all, I suppose, in many ways, tackling the onion, and as soon as we find one solution, there's a bit more that we have to go through. And again, I really can't say enough that it's been really educational through yesterday and today to hear, you know, whether it's the keynote speaker this morning talking about the 6 tenets that we need to address, whether it's a number of people talking about the legal and practical aspects, because we need to make sure that within the Navy, we may be disappearing off to conduct warfighting activity, but we need to make sure we're safe on a day-to-day manner as well. Next slide, please. Now, many of you may have heard and come across a group called Nemesis, whose mission is to accelerate and exploit the opportunities for these autonomous systems as we look to increase both mass and lethality within the future blended fleet. I say blended fleet because undoubtedly we cannot get rid of people. There was an interesting comment yesterday about whether we'd see a fully autonomous cruise ship. Well, you're never going to step away from the fact that someone needs to serve the dinner and the cocktails. Likewise for us, there's always going to be a requirement for personnel in some of our mission sets. So we're going to have to learn how to bring those together in that blended fleet. But Nemesis is there to make sure that we have a coherent, sustainable and effective introduction of those systems. The challenge, much like many of you today, is that we need to make sure that they're operated in a cost-effective manner, safely, securely, legal, ethical, and things like that. And of course, integrated with our human element as well. And so, but we also have the point that we need to make sure that they operate they are interoperable and interchangeable with both allies and partners. The barriers are the successful adoption and assessment is challenged by the technical policy and procedural issues that we've been discussing, and we here, NavyX, are part of that solution within the Navy to deliver that, to build the evidence base. We've been talking a lot yesterday and through this morning about having an evidence base for satisfying the assurance and accreditation groups that our system of systems are suitable and robust. And so whilst Nemesis will bring the coherence to the innovation space for the Navy, looking at digital lethality and autonomy, it's to DARE and NavyX that we really are going to focus on the autonomy. DARE has taken a lot of the acquisition element of what NavyX was doing, going out and working with people like Mike and BA and other contractors to bring into the systems that NavyX will then take away and conduct experimentation. And I think our experimentation is going to be about three areas. One, that we have our own equipment. We're going to talk about that shortly, and we need to go and build up that evidence. Two, we need to be working with our warfighters, but also industry. What have you got? What do we need? Bringing that together and proving it in our scenarios to make sure that we are all getting the right thing. And then thirdly is we need to build the framework for future systems. We need to make sure that we are satisfying the pathways for our regulators to ease the introduction of systems in the future. By no means is it set in stone, and we're not the first. NavyX is not the first. There are other systems out there delivering very specific areas, but we need to make sure that we have the generic piece. So we're going to focus on the integration and experimentation, but also on the slightly less certainly less interesting for some, but definitely very important, the framework of regulation. And so as we move to the next slide, Mike Wood is now going to take over with talking about some of the elements that we've worked through with him on our PAC 24 project. Mike.
Thank you, Anthony. Can I have the next slide, please? Today's presentation is really going to focus on our program with NavyX, which is around the autonomous Pacific 24 seaboat. So the Pacific 24 is the standard seaboat used on all our fleet. Type 23 currently has 2 on board. It's used as a manned mission boat and an emergency fast rescue craft, so it has SOLAS accreditation. And because of the limitations on today's platforms for launch and recovery and the ability to carry additional systems, the P24 as a donor vessel was identified as a really great opportunity to provide a manned-unmanned capability, to preserve a lot of the capability that the existing donor boat has, but to layer on top of that some autonomous capability. And the NavyX program, as Anthony described, is an experimentation program to evaluate how that might be used in a meaningful operational scenario, but still within the confines of effectively non-operational. So no risk in terms of starting an international incident, because we're doing it in a fairly controlled and safe way. One of the big challenges is the integration of that offboard asset, as we call it, so the USV, into the command and control system, so the combat management system of the host ship. And the aim is to extend its sphere of influence, both in terms of the sensor feeds that it can provide back into that host warship and the effect that it can deliver. So primarily focusing on the delivery of force protection and ISR missions, which really matches the sort of capabilities of the equivalent manned boat. But the focus of today's presentation is really around the security accreditation and safety approval process, which I think has real relevance to the non-defence sector as well. Next slide, please. So this diagram, which I'm not going to go through line by line, you'll be glad to hear, is our response to the Navy's BP10 approvals process and the DART security accreditation process. But there are really three main threads to it. So there's the approval process to make adaptations to a ship to accommodate this new technology. And that's the SIAP, or the Change Impact Assessment process. And through NavyX, we're implementing what's called a fleet minor trial, so a temporary fit that would allow technology to be explored and experimented with. We then got the engineering and safety solution, which effectively the process is called an installation solution. So it's a series of paperwork approvals and the physical installation on the mothership, on the host platform, and then the security process along the bottom, which I'll delve into in a bit more detail in a second, which is managed through the DART process. So if I could have the next slide, please. So security assurance is really defined by a whole bunch of existing documentation. So things in the open domain are really defined by the DEF stands and the DEFCONs. So DEFCON 658 covers cyber aspects, 659 covers security measures, and specifically for sort of the commonly used offboard systems, DEFCON 660 covers security classifications of official and official sensitive. I'll explain in a minute around the different security classifications and the particular challenges that has presented to this program. But as well as these generic DEFCONs, there are also contract-specific JSPs, or joint service publications, and the two most significant cover the topics of risk management and defence crypto security. Next slide, please. So focusing initially on the security assurance process, and I'm going to roll in many ways the subjects of cyber and security, as in governmental security, into one subject because they are so closely intertwined. The process is managed through the DART process. This is a process that's in the public domain. It's on the gov.co.uk website if you want to go and explore it in a bit more detail. But it starts with the allocation of a mod security accreditor, and he will help guide you through the process, but is also effectively the gatekeeper for the process. And it's facilitated in practical terms by a series of security working groups. In the program that we are currently involved in, there are three distinct phases. So we've got three security working groups. The first one tends to be setting the boundaries of what evidence is needed and how you're going to go for it. There's a midterm one and then a sort of an evidence at the end. But the key deliverables in effect are always the same. So there's what's called the RMADs, which is the risk management and accreditation document set. And that's a big fat document set which sets out the security case. The SIOPS, or security operating procedures, which is the practical day-to-day instructions for operators on what you can and can't do to protect the level of integrity of security in cyber that we've requested. And the COCO, or Code of Connection, which very clearly defines the interface between the unmanned system and the external world, because it's the interfaces which provide the real vulnerabilities and attack vector options. And this is underpinned by a really rigorous and independent set of penetration testing. So penetration testing, for those not familiar, is a bit like Rent-A-Hacker. It's independent bodies, and there are a number in the UK who employ, well, Dominic Cummins would call them weirdos and misfits, but I think that's slightly derogatory. Extremely talented, knowledgeable and capable people with an expert background in cybersecurity. Basically, they come into your site and they play with your equipment and they try and get in pretending they are an unscrupulous person, but then provide you with a really very detailed report on their findings. And the trick really is to make sure you come out of that process closing down all of the significant attack vectors. They use a really helpful categorization method, basically a score of 1 to 10 on how serious it is. And obviously, if you've got things right up at the top of series of 7s, 8s, and 9s, then this is a no-go. But inevitably, there are always, with cybersecurity in particular, a whole bunch of, well, you could do more here and you could do more here. But as long as they're down in the low categories, then that's okay. That falls into the realms of future work. Next slide, please. So this diagram, I'm afraid I am going to talk you through because it is sort of fairly fundamental. The real challenge we have is the security classification of our unmanned system is limited to official sensitive. The combat system, the operational combat system inside a warship that it needs to talk to is classified at UK secret. And clearly you can't just put an Ethernet cable between the two because that breaks all the rules. So on this diagram, if we start on the right hand side, each of these columns, and there are 4 shown in this diagram, are what we call security enclaves. So they are bounded conceptual constructs where all the data inside each of those columns is of the same security classification. So the operational combat system on a warship obviously has a very high security classification. It also has operational impacts, such as it is connected to weapons, and you need a high level of system integrity to be operating in that particular part of the system. The slightly lighter coloured box to its left is what we call the sandbox. It sits on the same physical architecture as the operational combat system, and it operates as at the same security classification, but there is a data diode between the two. So you can take the data that's in the combat system and share it with the sandbox, so you have the same tactical picture available to you, but no data can go back in. So whatever we do from the left-hand side of this diagram with our offboard system or in the Maple system, there's no risk of an untoward accident involving missiles or guns or driving the ship in the wrong direction. In the sandbox, we operate a system called Maple, which is a government investment that's been developed by a consortium led and funded by DSTL. And it is a wrapper around the combat management system that allows it to talk to generic unmanned systems. The box on the left-hand side of that is the low side ground control solution. So this is our local control suite, and it sits in a compartment with a much lower security classification than the combat management system. And it is separated by a security enforcing function, or you might also know the name as a deep inspection guard. And its role is to segregate the high and low classification systems. So it has a high side and low side. It has a whole series of technical protections, both in terms of data manipulation and physical integrity. So it's there's no copper link, it's an optical link in both directions. So it is effectively a bi-directional data diode, and it inspects every single bit of data, compares it to a template of what's allowed to go through the security classification, and blocks anything that doesn't meet that criteria. Then once that data is in the low side, it is safe to transmit interchangeably with the information on the offboard asset, which may in fact be 20 miles away from the ship. Overlaid on that, we have 5 separate layers of penetration testing. So the first layer looks specifically at the communications link between the ship and the USV, and all the layers of encryption and segregation that go in there. The second is in the deep inspection guard itself. The third looks purely at the link between the USV, so the end-to-end system, but just taking into scope the USV and its ground control system. The fourth is the link between Maple and the ground control system. So you can see here we're building up an incremental approach and a set of evidence. And the fifth is the full system, Maple out to the offboard system, out on the water. So you can imagine this is not a trivial process, but it is extremely thorough. Next slide, please. So moving on to safety, we have the huge advantage that the USV that we have developed is building on the pedigree of a boat that has been in service for over a decade already. So it already has all the sort of the physical wrinkles and issues that you might expect with a new platform ironed out for us. And we've also have a huge amount of evidence to underpin the safety case for the, if you like, the naval architecture side of things. So our focus within this program has really been the layer we put on top of that in terms of making this, converting it from a manned boat to an optionally manned or an unmanned boat. Our underpinning documentation set has to comply with DEFSTAN 0056, which is the generic safety standard for everything in the military world. But we've tried wherever we can to comply with the voluntary code of practice that's being developed by James and the team in the MAS regulatory working group, and also an established proprietary hazard identification and analysis process that many of you will find familiar, but I won't go through in detail today. In terms of deliverables, again, it's quite a significant document set. So the Safety and Environmental Case Report is probably the wrapper document. So that's what most people would recognise as the safety case. Really detailed safe operating procedures are an absolute essential. So the safety case report obviously relies on those safe operating procedures, but our incremental approach obviously relies on different modes of operation. So it needs to cover when it's manned, when it's operating unmanned but with people on board, and when it's operating without people on board, as effectively 3 different safety cases. The first, if you like, outcome of that becomes the Mod Boat Safety Certificate from the Naval Assurance Group, or the NAG. And that's a real milestone when that was issued in terms of its approval for us to go out and start testing in a real world environment based in, we're based in Portsmouth in the Solent. It's a really busy area, although it has a whole bunch of controls around it. It's still a busy area that prone to incident if you don't have the right measures in place. And then the very end of the process is a certificate of clearance for use for the overall system, and that's still work that will be happening over the coming months. Can I have the next slide, please? Next slide, please. So our safety argument is fundamentally based on the concept of equivalency and claims that the AP24 is as safe as manned, and we use goal structure notation to support this claim through a series of sub-goals and evidence. It's a really well-established and rigorous process, but it requires a huge amount of attention to detail, and as you can imagine, it's underpinned by a hazard ID that may have many hundreds of different hazards identified, and you need a countermeasure or a mitigation for each and every one of those to justify this overall claim. Next slide, please. And so our approach has been strength in depth. It's a recognised approach, but it has no shortcuts. Strength in depth, as the title dictates, really requires you going down every strand and bottoming out every identified hazard and what you're going to do. Some of those approaches are procedural, so they are operational things that you put in safety control processes, such as certain circumstances you might have a guard vessel, certain circumstances you might have people operating on the boat, you might have reduced operating speeds in certain circumstances, and some of them are more fundamental about the design of the system, and we use a terminology called safety integrity levels, or SIL levels, to identify safety related features and to assess and assign an appropriate safety integrity level to each of those features. What this gives us is a system of 4 layers of safety mitigations. So layer 1, and the most fundamental, is system integrity. So this is our confidence in the system to do what we expect it to do. The second is system oversight, and this is the ability to put additional human intervention over the top. So an example is it has a high integrity emergency stop system. So if a person either on the vessel or in the control room hits the big red button, then everything shuts down. And there are criteria about how quickly and how far it can travel in that intervening speed period, and you match your speeds to the level of risk in the operational context with those timings. The third is around limitations, and there may be limitations about what you can do, where you can do it, and how you do it. And as I've already alluded to, that might include, for certain operations, having persons on board. It may, even in unmanned mode, it may require guard vessels to keep people out of the operating area, or just people keeping a safe lookout. And the fourth and final layer is that fallback, so that last response process, and they range between remote emergency stop systems and automatic systems, a little bit car parking sensors, where if the boat senses there is an immediate threat to, for example, a collision, it will take emergency action, again through a high integrity system, just to shut everything down and avoid that action. Next slide, please. So I think in summary, the issues of safety and security are really significant, and they are interlinked. MOD and industry have some fairly robust and established processes of assurance, and they have translated, I think, very well into the processes that are needed for unmanned systems. Layered controls provide quite effective mitigations for trial scenarios, but as the world moves out of Navy X experimentation to operational deployment, then much higher levels of system integrity are going to be required, and it looks increasingly like levels of integrity at SIL 3 and SIL 4 will become the norm in the coming years. Thank you very much, and I hope you found that interesting.
I certainly did, and I'm sure a lot of other people did. I would draw attention to the last slide that's just come up from Mike Stable. I've published a question from Phil Buckley, and it's French. Le mieux est l'ennemi du bien. The best is the enemy of the good. And I think some may have drawn the conclusion that there's quite a tentative approach by the Royal Navy to this whole question of running vessels with no crew on board. I wonder, Anthony, if I could just ask you to put a comment on that first of all, please.
No, absolutely. I think we are taking a cautious view, and I think you were demanded of us because we don't wish to be unsafe, and we are going to have to move from a test experimentation into an operational period. And so we do need to make sure that we have got this right. And as Mike said, we're going to be demanding some high standards of regulation and reliance. So we have to be cautious. Now, one man's freedom fighter is another man's guerrilla. We think we are taking the right approach. It is undoubtedly going to be judged by others to be too slow. And I think as we get more experience, we will be able to develop quicker. But for the moment, I think we're in the right place.
Okay. You'll be familiar with Alan Cartwright, and he's raised a question which is up there on the web. You can see it. Safety and regulation. He heard plague the sector and is questioning that, surely support rather than plague. And he says, you know, we're continuing to support BAE and Navy X vessels by advice and surveying, and he's booked in. He's one of your surveyors on the P24. And he's also made the point of making sure that all the lessons learned get included in the MCA workboat code, which Katrina trailed yesterday. Mike, do you have a payoff comment on that question?
Yeah, so I recognise Alan's comments. He's been extremely helpful through the process. We've used him on a number of our craft, including the AP24 for this programme. It's a common theme that other people were saying all the way through yesterday, that working hand in glove with the regulators is really important. We are all somewhat feeling our way in the dark. So, you know, we're pushing boundaries in some places, we're exchanging information and we're learning, and hopefully that will get fed back into the documentation. I fully support that as an intent.
Okay, Ralph Dodds has asked a question. What does SPECAP mean? SPECAP, please.
Yeah, so that's one of our arms. It stands for Special Capabilities, and they're looking at some of the above secret elements of capabilities that we need. Over.
Acronym soup, here we go. Autonomy is driving an awful lot. I'm sure there are more questions out there, but I'll just draw this one to a close. I mean, the nice thing is to know that the industrial side and the defence side are working very closely hand in glove, which is great, and we're all taking lessons from each other. And I know that there is huge emphasis on, you know, moving from the ethereal maybe we could to the let's do it phase of certainly defence in UK and indeed elsewhere. If we had the US Navy here, they'd be talking about an awful lot of things that they're up to, and many other navies are now looking very actively at mine countermeasures vessels which won't have crew. As an ex-commanding officer of one, I'm rather pleased with that because it was pretty hairy when we were doing it. As I close this particular session, it gives me an opportunity to say thank you to Mike and BAE Systems. On the screen at the moment, you'll see that BAE Systems is one of our key sponsors. And indeed, they sponsored the production of version 4 of the Code of Practice he referred to. You can see this on the conference website under Maritime UK. You can download a copy, or indeed you can go on Maritime UK's own site and you can download copies. We do have printed versions of this, and if anybody wants to follow up by sending an email as to how they can be acquired, I would welcome it, and I'm sure Mike would too, because we've got several hundred of them waiting. Very difficult in London because there's nobody there. But my chance to say from us in the MAS Red Group to you, BAE Systems, many thanks for your support, and in particular for the code work that you helped us with this time. So to both of you, to Anthony, good luck, and Mike, thank you very much. And we'll move on now to looking at what Thales are doing. Thanks. Now, I hope that we've got Stewart Radcliffe lined up, ready to go. And his talk is going to be on the maritime autonomous systems. He entitled it Guidelines versus Reality. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he says. Stewart, the floor is yours. Away you go.
Hello, and it's great to be here. So as James says, I'm Stewart Radcliffe from Thales UK, and welcome to the English countryside. I know we're all distributed around the world today, so I'm just hoping that the network survives as the current storm blows in as well. So I've represented Thales at the Maritime Autonomous Systems Regulatory Working Group for a couple of years now, and it's always been an extremely valuable forum to engage with key stakeholders from different communities, and it really is a great opportunity to present here at the conference this year. The annual conference is a really good chance to hear from a wide range of speakers, and I'd say in particular from other countries as well. The presentation earlier from Korea was really interesting. Now, obviously it's a little different this year, but on the plus side, I think maybe that's allowed a few more people to join than if we'd had it physically. So to set the context, Thales we're a global company, works with autonomous systems in a range of civil as well as defence and security markets. So autonomous trains, we're involved in automotive, UAVs, and obviously maritime autonomous systems, which is where I'm going to focus in this slot. But we also produce the supporting capabilities that you need to make those autonomous systems work safely and effectively. So, for example, the security and communication systems, again, topics that have come up in various presentations during this conference. Now, in the maritime domain, we are mainly focused on the defence and security uses, and you're going to see some photos of that in the presentation. This isn't a Thales sales pitch. If you want a Thales sales pitch, then let me know afterwards. But just picking up on the back end of the previous presentation, the boats that you see, the USVs that you see, are directed towards a mine countermeasures operational use. So in some of the discussions today, there have been points about making sure that there is a need for maritime autonomous systems, and certainly in some parts of the defence and security area, there are key benefits, like reducing risk to personnel. But there are also some other more speculative thoughts too. Now, in this slot, in this presentation, I'll go across a few points. First of all, touching on why do we need guidelines, regulations? What value do they bring? Their relationship to MAS. Some comments about MAS in terms of guidelines, regulations, and then a bit of a view about the future of maritime autonomous systems and how that relates to guidelines, regulations. So if we could have the next slide, please. Okay, so guidelines, regulations, why do we need them? I found a nice description on the UK's National Audit Office about the objective of regulations. And they say that regulation is used to protect and benefit people, businesses and the environment, and to support economic growth. And in that description, that NAO description, the codes of practice sit on the spectrum of approaches to regulation towards a market-driven rather than a government-driven end, which feels right for an area like MAS, where the players in the market are responsible and recognise the need for a level of control. We all across society, we all need to have confidence in what is happening. Again, that was a point that was touched on in the keynote earlier about trust and acceptability by society. And I would absolutely comment that we are well supported in the evolving MAS regulations by both the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency and the civil side, and also on the defence side by the Defence Maritime Regulator, supported by the Naval Authority Group. And certainly the MAS RWG is working to help set out the frameworks within which we can provide that required level of protection without stifling innovation and allowing us to enable economic growth. So there has certainly been some really exciting applications of MAS over recent times. There are some significant defence and security contracts that have been signed recently, and again, some of the presentations from this conference, some really exciting new business launches in the commercial arena. And the challenge here is ensuring that there's enough control without building constraints that are either going to just be worked around or will stop development. And I think as part of that, the choice of language and terms is an interesting topic, and I don't think we're settled there on what that commonality of language is, but we need it to help with the exchange of ideas. And I'll talk a little bit in a little while about terminology to an extent. And from an international topic like MAS, it's even more important that we have a way of communicating clearly. So we need to make sure that the guidelines and regulations are there, so we have confidence in the safe and effective development and use of MAS. And I've included a photo on this slide here of a shore-based site. It happens to be where we conduct maritime autonomy trials in the UK. And that's since the guidelines regulations involved in MAS apply to all aspects of the context of maritime autonomous systems. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. So what is MAS? What are maritime autonomous systems? So what is the scope of the challenge and the opportunity? I have been talking here about maritime autonomous systems, and I do realise that the conference topic is maritime autonomous surface ship regulations, unlocking the future of MAS. And to be clear, I'm not in conflict with that title. So if I can explain what I mean by MAS, because it helps me to set the context of what I'm looking at, what I understand. And we have talked about a lot of these topics in the MAS RWG. So when I say maritime, I mean the capabilities that operate at or from the sea. As is the focus of this conference, that includes platforms that operate on the surface, and there's a large range of sizes in use and that's being proposed, some of which we've seen in the conference, and others are out there on the internet fairly easy to find, and those have different speeds and different manoeuvring capabilities and intended to do different jobs. For us, with MAS, there are also platforms that operate below the surface. And where it's an interesting point here, certainly in the defence and security world, and I think in some of the civil areas around oil and gas and exploring the seabed, where the surfacing of large underwater vehicles is being considered. So how they behave or how they appear when they're on the surface is important. And similarly, we also need to think about air platforms, and that's including if they're launched from other surface or indeed subsurface platforms. And from a guidelines regulations point of view, for both air platforms and I'd say underwater platforms, the transition from one regime to another needs to be understood, and that can introduce complexity. When I say autonomous, then to me, autonomy is something of an emergent capability, by which I mean it's something that is a result of the application of a set of technologies. There are various definitions of autonomy, and fundamentally, I'll say it comes down to where the decisions are made and the interaction with the human in that decision making. Now, the core of the autonomous system is a decision-making engine, whether it's a set of rules or a machine learning algorithm. And I mentioned about terminology earlier, and we tend to talk about autonomy relatively loosely, I'd say, and this is where some of the difficulties lie, as we try and possibly generalize from systems where you can clearly predict what will happen, so it's deterministic, to those where the system learns. They're not the same thing. Now, I'd also say that as well as that decision-making part, as I say, lies at the core of it, the enabling technologies for MAS are critical. So that includes the sensing systems and also how the decisions that are made are put into effect. So if I reflect back a little bit on the term, then it is changing, and we are seeing it in different communities with a move towards maritime uncrewed systems as opposed to autonomous systems. But I think some of the underlying points are there, and I think as as terminology and language settles down, we'll converge on an agreed set of terms to use. Now, in terms of systems, in the maritime autonomous systems, there are many components. It is easy to focus on the platforms, but we need to look wider and understand how all the different parts work together. And I've said platforms, but I think we need to remember that it's a platform and a payload. So the platform hosts a payload, and it's the payload that actually does something. In the case of some of the platforms in the photos that you're, as I say, they are directed towards a mine countermeasures type operation. And so those payloads might be towed some distance behind the surface platform. Or in other cases, we're seeing that the payloads might be deployed or recovered from the surface platform. And again, that's not purely a defence aspect. There are also civil applications for that too. And I would just say, just having followed on from the previous presentation with the which had a picture of a gun on the front of a boat. In this case, I'm not talking about the potential for hosting weapons on USVs in this presentation. I think that's an entirely different discussion. So this is around the, let's say, the navigational autonomy of it. And from the systems perspective, as has been mentioned in other presentations, papers, the communications need to be robust and secure. And there are multiple bearers, multiple communication systems involved in the MAS picture, such as radio communications, SATCOMs, and even underwater communications. And we're seeing 5G come into play in the test bed that's going to be put into Plymouth. Will be a really interesting opportunity to look at another technology. Each of those has advantages and disadvantages, with the need to swap bearers as appropriate according to the need and the location. Now, a core part of the system is the operation centres, and where they are in place, they need to be suitable for the safe operation of remote platforms, and sometimes multiple platforms. The picture you see here on the slide is a somewhat smaller operation centre than what Dan Hook showed yesterday for Armada. But you know, we need to be able to put ours in the back of a plane, so it's somewhat smaller than what he is proposing. And I'll highlight that the human is a key part of the system. So whatever the level of autonomy, there will be a human element, and that person, those people, must have the right information available to them. So one of the great things about the MAS RWG is the range of stakeholders. And some of the discussions around legal aspects and training are also fundamental. If you leave it to the technologists and engineers, we'll do something great to get something great working, but that's not the whole story. So if you go to the next slide, please. So when we're talking about the application of regulations and guidelines to MAS, then the landscape is broad. And some aspects will be incorporated into existing processes. Thales, we're a large, mature business. We operate in regulated areas, so we have structures and processes in place. We have a safety management system, which allows us to consider safety aspects of MAS. We have experienced cyber specialists who understand systems and communication security. And we've been running trials at dedicated facilities and on operational platforms for many years. As Sarah Kenny highlighted in the keynote earlier, that requires significant investment, but it does deliver key learning. And when we seek to apply guidelines and regulations to MAS, we do need to make sure that they're not so onerous as to impose excessively high barriers to entry. Otherwise, there's a risk of preventing opportunities for innovation and new entrants to the market. So we're a large business, we do a load of stuff, but we do recognise the value that smaller businesses that might be focused on certain areas bring. The breadth of the systems, large number of parts, does introduce complexity, and that includes the regulations. And I think I would note the good work that the MCA has done with the MARLAB, and some of the approaches that they are pushing forward with the Maritime Future Team are certainly going to be very beneficial to us all, especially with the coherence with international efforts through the IMO. I know from our briefings that we've had with our defence and security customers that they are very keen to increase the use of MADs in a range of areas and to do so very rapidly. There are various reasons they want to do that, and there can be an impression that guidelines and regulations may be barriers to that, so we need to work to ensure that their needs are met, but still ensuring safety. So if you come to the next slide, please. So in terms of the experience of MADs, the learning experience really does come from the real world. Some of the experience is not specific to maritime autonomous systems, but it does need to be borne in mind here. Trials at sea are expensive and time consuming, and that includes the MADs. So we found a flexible approach, being able to deal with changes in weather when that blows in. So from our Tinmouth Wharf Plymouth facility, we can access sheltered and more open waters, and we can adjust timetables of activities accordingly. And that can only be done within effective infrastructure, by which I mean the systems, but also the people and the processes. And when we test USVs that can run in autonomous mode, so they can sense and avoid other vessels, we always have a safety pilot on board, but we need to make sure that those safety pilots understand the peculiarities, let's say, of some of the behaviours. I'd also say it's also fair to say that a lot of problems are not to do with autonomy as such. Mechanical failures are there. We've probably all read in the press about unmanned ships requiring personnel to be embarked to fix mechanical problems. And as systems mature, and particularly for platforms that are operated a long way from sport, I'm sure there's going to be an increasing focus on reliability. We can also learn from other domains. We've seen air accident investigation reports into crashes of UAVs, and the topic of human error comes up, and I would say not always correctly attributed. So a key part of that is making sure that the remote operator really does understand what is happening. If they are going to be held accountable for decisions that are made, then we need to make sure that they are in a position to do that, and that's an area where we are conducting research. So if you can go on to the next slide, please. So in terms of the future then, blending the real world and virtual world testing is going to increase in importance. I mentioned earlier about the expense running real world trials, and synthetic environments is one way in which some aspects of MADs can be tested, perhaps through evolving, developing particular capabilities without having the whole system, and some really interesting approaches in terms of blending those real and virtual approaches, the live virtual constructive simulations, as it's called. And synthetic environments also allow the what-if experience to be tried. So the figure shows a UAV that's taken off from a USV, and the UAV is carrying a little robot that's going to put on a wind turbine blade, which you can just see on the right there. And that's the experiments geographically located in Plymouth, which doesn't have a wind farm, but using virtual worlds allows us to try that out. And there are also opportunities for using synthetic environments for assurance activities. We have run multiple simulations of different levels of complexity to investigate the behaviour of our autonomy engines, which allows an understanding of the behaviours to be built, and also to investigate edge case testing, as it's called. So those rare but challenging situations. When we do use synthetic environments, we need to be very clear on the scope. For example, the extent to which the environment itself needs to be assured. So the physical features of the environment need to be correct and come from authoritative sources. The weather effects need to be appropriate for the geographical region and with valid representations of the effects on physical systems. And the behaviour of other systems or other players in that synthetic environment needs to be consistent. When we conduct these simulations and the assessments, then we need to make sure it is clear how we are measuring assurance. So if we can go on to the final slide, please. So in conclusion, guidelines and regulations are certainly needed to assure maritime autonomous systems. Clearly, we need those guidelines and regulations to protect people in the environment and to allow a framework for economic development. And the MES RWG is going to continue to be a key forum to do that in the UK, bringing together a wide range of stakeholders. Safety is a critical characteristic of MES, but it's not, unfortunately, safety is not always seen as the most exciting aspect. So we need to make sure that we have approaches in place that are not viewed as unnecessarily slowing the pace of advance. Someone mentioned yesterday in the forum about an activity we conducted in the Netherlands by Marin, the Cape project. And possibly that's something we could look at in the UK, a pan-stakeholder activity to develop a standard method for assuring autonomy that would benefit all stakeholders. So regulators, government, industry, suppliers. It's not a trivial activity, and it does need a range of stakeholders to be involved to ensure that any approach is accepted and adopted. But I suggest something that we could think about over the coming months. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and certainly do contact me if there are any further questions. But look forward to the panel discussion, and if there are any questions directly after this. Thank you.
Stewart, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to leave the questions now because we're trying to catch up a bit of time. I hope there's no significance in the fact that you've got a USV or a MASS seen in the Dart River in front of the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth, which produces naval officers to go into the fleet, when we're suggesting that maybe there'll be slightly less requirement for them in the future.
Well, I'm not sure about whether there'll be fewer officers or will their roles change. I think, and I'm sure that's true in the civil area. Different skills, different opportunities, I'd say.
That's exactly the point, and I totally agree with you. It may be different skills, but we're always going to need people, whether they be officers or ratings in the Navy and other navies around the world. Listen, thank you very much indeed, Stewart, for that. What's going to happen now is that we're going to take a short break. It'll be about 10 minutes maximum. We have to reset the whole thing. For those of you who are waiting to speak, that's Britt, Anthony and Tony and Ben eventually for the panel. It'll all come back up with you coming into the green room. So for now, there'll be an 8 to 10 minute pause. And thank you all very much. We'll pick it up with Britt as soon as we come back live. Thank you.